Hey, y'all. Lisa Kipps-Brown here, your host for Adaptable Entrepreneurs for my pre-Thanksgiving special. We're doing it a day early and at lunchtime so that we can all get rocking into Thanksgiving. I have a great guest today that I think is very appropriate for this time of giving thanks for everything. I want y'all to welcome Brian Bogert, and I'm going to let him introduce himself because he has such a great story that there's no way I can do it justice. Hello, Brian, and welcome.
Lisa, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm just grateful for people like you that have platforms like this to just put good into the world. So, man, this is going to be a fun show today, and it's going to be a good time. I want everybody who's watching or listening to just close your eyes for 1 second. I'll tell you when to reopen them.
I'm going to close my eyes too.
Go for it, Lisa. Make it happen. Yeah, okay. I'll tell you when to open.
Okay.
I want you to imagine walking out of a shopping store, walking to your car, turning your head and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. That's where this portion of my story begins. Go ahead and open your eyes now. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to our car, I've always had an excitement and vigor for life, so it's not a surprise I was to the car first. And I got there, put my hand on the handle, and waited for my mom and brother, who were only 3 or 4 feet behind me, to catch up. You see, this was back in the days when she couldn't just unlock the car with a key fob. She had to literally stick the key in the door.
Yeah.
And so I'm waiting for them to catch up, for her to unlock the doors, and so we can get home and put that 1-inch paintbrush to use. While that happened, there was a truck that pulled up in front of the store. And the driver and the middle passenger got out. The passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, and he moved over to put his foot on the brake. But he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. Now, we were parked in an end spot, and so he went up and over the median, went up and over the tree in the median, hit our car, yanked me to the ground, and ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and it continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body.
Wow.
So there I am, laying on the pavement, 115-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona. My mom and brother watched the whole thing happen. My arm is 10 feet away from me in the parking lot. And my guardian angel also watched the whole thing happen. You see, a nurse walked out of the store right when this took place, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario that was in front of her, and she rushed immediately into action. She came over and immediately stopped the bleeding on the wound to save my life. And she also instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my severed limb on ice within minutes. Had she not done one or both of those things, Lisa, I either wouldn't be here with you today, or I'd be here with you today, but without an arm.
Yeah. Okay. I have to wipe my eyes. I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. It's getting more and more emotional for me as well, because my son is almost the exact same age I was when my accident happened. So
I knew a bit of the story. I knew the truck. I knew the arm, the nurse, but I didn't know all the details. When you're telling it, the hair's standing up on my arms.
Yeah, it's every time I tell it, it stands up on my arms too. So, I'll expedite the rest of the story because that's one of the most relevant parts. And I'm sure that people who are watching today weren't expecting it to go there.
Yeah.
Right. I realize that I have a very unique story. But what I've also realized in all my time of doing this is that we all have unique stories. So what's important is that we need to learn to pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from our stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that regardless of what our stories are. And we also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories. So I'm going to share 2 primary stories with you today, and we may unpack them later, we may not, depending on where the conversation goes, but I'm going to share them with you now. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it.
Ooh, I love that. That's a great thought.
Thank you. The second I didn't realize until far later. You see, because at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I was experiencing all of those post-accident years in a fog. Yeah. Although I was very aware of what was happening to me, I was also being guided through the process with my strong, capable parents. They were not in a fog, however. And so the unceasing medical treatments, years of physical therapy, all of the recovery, they were extremely aware of. You see, the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his arm was a source of great suffering for them. So they literally willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, do what was tough, do what it was going to take to ultimately heal and strengthen me. They literally embraced the pain of the process to avoid the suffering of seeing me grow up with the use of my arm. And so whether it was intentional or not, they engraved in me a philosophy and a way of living, which was to embrace pain to gain or to avoid suffering. And when we do this correctly, we also gain freedom. So this is the same philosophy that I used to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I built our last business from $250,000 to over 15 million in the span of a decade.
Wow.
And now how I put that on its head as a human behavior, performance, and coach and speaker to now help hundreds of individuals and organizations just like you, just like a number of the people watching today, become more aware, more intentional, and more of who they already are, their most authentic selves. Because I believe when we do that, that's when magic happens and the door begins to crack to perspective, motivation, and direction. So there's a quick intro on me.
That is so powerful. I didn't know that about your business either. So you're going to have to get into that with us. But it's just so powerful and it's so true. I think too many of us just take what's coming at us and we take it passively and we react and we never act and we never learn. We just kind of tend to feel sorry for ourselves or try to get past it instead of learning something from it and growing. And
right.
I love your point that about learning from each other's experiences, because other people's pain and the things that they go through can teach us just as many lessons as if we had to go through it ourselves. And thankfully we don't.
Yeah, agree. But that requires us to be aware. That requires us to listen. That requires us to watch and apply those lessons, right? Because if we do that, we can shorten our own curve to learning. If we don't, we're going to suffer through the same pain that somebody else might have, and it might not be necessary.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you pausing to recognize that point, because again, I agree. I've learned at least half, if not more, of everything that I have that has shortened my curve to learning from other people. It's not my own experiences. I mean, I have a lot of my own experiences that we'll unpack, I'm sure, through pieces of this today. But the reality of it is I've learned more from other people than I ever have through my own experiences.
Yeah, that's really good. I had mentioned to you earlier, I know that a lot of the reason that I am like I am, as far as resiliency and stubbornness, but not going to take no, I'm going to figure out a way to do it, is because my father was blind, but he rode horses, he owned a business, he shot guns, he played basketball with us and pitched baseball with my cousin. And people who don't know him, you know, they would be like, how could he ever do that? And growing up, people used to tell us, oh my God, your father's amazing. You know, adults. And we used to be like, you know, he was just daddy. We didn't think him as being blind, but he was such a role model because of what he did instead of what he didn't do. Yeah.
And it's not a matter of if he was going to do something, it was a matter of how.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And so he was going to learn the path. I mean, I identify on that with at a deep level, as I'm sure you can appreciate. You know, I think that was a big part of my story. I think perspective points us at what's important. And I think you hit on it a minute ago, but you know, people can feel like the victim. They can feel sorry for themselves. They can feel what's happening. And I'd be lying if I said that I was laying in that bed at 7 years old and not feeling sorry for myself. Not asking the question, why did this happen to me? Why me? Why me? Right. And then as we're in there in the ICU room and we've got families coming up to us saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. We're so sorry. What can we do to help? And then we come to find out that their kid's laying in the ICU bed next to me, not knowing if they're going to survive another month because of the terminal illness that they have.
Oh, man.
Right? And that happened time and time and time again. And so it's pretty quick to knock yourself out of feeling sorry for yourself when you realize that your life is secure. At that moment, I didn't know if my arm would ever be successfully reattached. Or if I'd have function of it like I do today. But the point is, I was going to have my life.
That's
right. And so then when I rolled out of that, the next piece of that was people immediately labeled me and put beliefs and boundaries on me because of their own lens on the world.
Yes. Yeah.
And I refuse to be defined by those boundaries. And so that's a big part of how I've lived my life. Now, my mom and dad will tell you that I came out this way, right? That I was always kind of on this path to just be who I was going to be and live with no limits. But the reality of it is the perspective from this situation certainly honed that craft for me to the point that it's like, I really genuinely believe, I mean, this is a lot of our philosophies and our coaching and everything is no limits. We can live with no limits. Because whatever limits exist are ones that we place on ourselves or the world has placed on us that we haven't seen and identified.
I love that. And there are two very important parts in that. The terrible accident that you went through, but the perspective gained from I'm alive and this child beside me is on their journey to not being alive.
Right.
Number one. And number two is, to me, imagining what your life would have been like if you hadn't had to go through this. Because you did have to go through this, it's such a huge part of making you the person that you are today and putting you in the position of being able to help so many other people and give them strength. It's just amazing the things that happen to us that we look at them as negative, because hello, of course, it's not a positive to have your arm torn off. But yes, it's a negative, but look at all the positives that have come out of it.
I'd never change it. I've had so many people ask me at this point in my life, like, would you take it back if you could? And I wouldn't. Like, there's no hesitation when I say that. I'd be lying if I said there was moments through my upbringing or early adulthood or whatever, where I didn't like how I looked. I knew I didn't fit in, right? I hadn't totally centered with who I was. And so I was insecure about pieces of it. Like, that was just a part of the journey. And in those moments when I was feeling weak and vulnerable, would I have changed it? Probably.
Yeah.
But what I know now is way too valuable, right? And I wouldn't change it. And when you say, what would it look like without my accident, without the perspective that I gained, I don't say this in any way to impress. I say it to impress upon the point. Life came easy to me. I was speaking full sentences at 18 months. I asked my dad to take my training wheels off at 2.5, and I rode on a 12-inch bike with and I don't say that to be like, oh, look at me, I'm great. But stuff came easy. And what I genuinely believe today is that had I not had this to ratchet me back, I'd probably be the most arrogant a-hole on the planet. Because I would not have the perspective to recognize that it's like, no. Like, there's challenges and struggles that we need to overcome. And when stuff comes too easy to certain people, it can go into their head in a way that's not healthy. I believe that that's the path I would have been on. Yeah.
You are so right about that, because if you don't have challenges, to me, that's just as much or more of a handicap, if you will, to your growth than somebody who has many, many challenges. Because look at, so many very successful people in history and the things that they had to overcome. And then you look at, all you have to do is look at really wealthy kids, families and kids of privilege, and realize that they have no rudder. They're adrift because they never really had to worry about anything.
Yeah.
So, we asked Daddy a few times when we were growing up. We're like, because we would hear on the news something about, they were working on ways to try to give blind people back their sight. And we would ask him, would you do this if you could? No, I wouldn't. And we couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
But of course, as an adult, I do understand it.
Yeah. I mean, you just, again, like when you go through life with challenges, right?
Yeah.
Particularly physical challenges of some capacity, right? You learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about the world because you interact with it differently.
Yeah.
And people who don't have those same physical challenges. And so, I think what is gained significantly outweighs whatever those challenges are, as long as, again, you're choosing to look for them as lessons, as opportunities for growth. The flip side to that is there are enough people who have certain challenges that take the victim mentality. Right. Yeah. And they're the individuals that get stuck. But how many times do we see challenges as well that might not seem like they would crush somebody, but to that own person, it's intense enough that it causes them to stick, right? It could be literally a financial strain or a breakup in a relationship, and all of a sudden their entire life is derailed, right?
And just can't get past it.
They just can't get past it. And so I think that's the interesting thing. You said something earlier as well that I think is really important, because the core of a lot of the work that we do really gets at increasing levels of awareness, because I genuinely believe that, like, what we're not aware of, we can't be intentional with. And if we look at this from studies, our minds process 11 million bits of information per second, but we're only consciously aware of about 40. So what that means is that we're largely led by the unconscious.
Yeah.
And how many people in this world want to feel like they've got some level of control, some level of influence in the direction of their life? Most people, they want more, right? They're like, yeah, I'm raising my hand. I want more. How do I get more? Well, until we go through a systematic process of moving the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, it's going to feel like life is happening to us, like it's fate, like we don't have that control or influence. And so that's why I always start with awareness, because until we can start moving those things into a place of awareness, we can't be intentional with them as human beings, as business owners, as high performers, right? So it could be emotional triggers, it could be behavioral patterns, it could be blind spots that we don't even see. And that's like so core to that, because often, right, in these scenarios where people get stuck, there's something they're not seeing.
Yeah. An example that probably a lot of people can relate to, and this isn't really what you're talking about, but this is an action. I eat too fast. And, and I'll be like, all the food's gone and I haven't tasted. And they'll go, why can't? And over the years, I've tried to force myself to think about what I'm eating and to taste it, and that's not what you're talking about, but I like analogies. So,
but it might be. It might be. I'm curious, Lisa.
Yeah.
Why do you think you eat so fast?
I honestly don't know. I mean, we really didn't have much growing up, and technically we were below the poverty line, but we had dinner every night, and I don't know. I tend
How many siblings do you have?
I'm sorry, what?
How many siblings do you have?
They're 2 sisters, 3 girls, and I'm the middle one. So
and you're the middle. Yeah. And so although you probably, well, you even said it, right? You didn't have means. You always had food on the table, but I'm just going to take a venture to guess that there was a mad dash at dinner time to be able to get as much food as you could in, because it was going to be gone.
Yeah. I tend to do everything fast though. Like I walk really fast, and this man stopped me one day. He's like, where are you going? Is something wrong? I'm like, what? No, I'm just walking, and I talk fast and and being
I'm the same way as you. And I grew up in a family that again, we had means, but what was made was what was made. And I grew up in a family where everybody eats fast. I was the youngest, right? If I didn't eat fast, I wasn't eating enough food.
Yeah.
Because my brother and my dad would be back for seconds, right? Like we'd be like, it was just what it was. And so it's like I look at that today. The reason I say that though is it's like there is typically a root cause to a lot of our actions and behaviors, because we are products of our conditioning from our environments and our upbringing. And so you say it's not what I'm talking about, but I'll bet you that there is some correlation to you walking fast, talking fast, eating fast that had something to do with how you were brought up.
Yeah. Well, and not to be all about me, but I was really quiet and shy growing up. And my mother said I didn't start talking to my older sister, went to college, because my older sister talks even more than me. But anyway, as the middle child, it's always been so interesting to me. I've noticed this literally probably since we were teenagers. I go up to a door. If I've got my hands full, I've got like things wrapped around my arms. I stick them under my arms, stick them between my legs, everything to open the door myself. And my sister, the oldest, she might have one thing in her hand. She's like, here, hold this. And I'm like, she has no clue that she even does it. And I don't mean that to be critical of her, but it's just so different.
That's a perfect example of like people will do things unconsciously.
Yeah.
Right. And until we start to understand like that there are these patterns that exist, it's the same thing in business.
Yeah.
Right. The reality of it is this whole concept of embrace pain to avoid suffering is to really suggest that we do things sometimes without even thinking about it. So I'll give you a couple examples on what this is. Right. So we can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid a loveless marriage that's going to end up in divorce, or being stuck in a marriage that when we want a divorce, right? We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we'll never get back. As business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson to avoid the suffering of losing all our other top talent and stagnant growth, because they're the biggest cancer in our culture.
Okay.
Right. So when you think about this, like we don't, like, again, as a business owner, we're going to look at top line revenue growth is here. That's great. Top line revenue growth is good for our business. But until we take a moment back and realize that there is an impact of that top line revenue growth, if that individual is the biggest cancer in our culture, we're going to be stuck in that self-defeating path. And so what we often needs to do, and this is the second step that I typically teach, I'm going to jump over the first one because this is where it gets interesting. I teach people that they need to identify the pains they tend to avoid and learn to embrace them. And it's often an unconscious thing. So I'll give 2 examples. One is my own, one is someone from a conversation I talked with before. My own is my arm. I have an imbalance. I don't have a tricep. I don't have a lat in my back. The older I got, the more I was having back pain that was literally turning into suffering. It was debilitating. This happened about 15 years ago. And I started to realize that if I can stay lean, if I can stay fit, If I can work out and keep my core strength strong, then that suffering is a manageable pain.
Okay.
So what did I do? I joined a gym. I started going to the gym because that's what you do. If you're going to get healthy and you're going to move, you go start finding a way to work out.
Yeah.
I went for about 30 days and then I stopped going. So I had to ask myself, is it the pain of weight training that I'm avoiding or the anxiety when I go into a crowded gym?
Oh, okay.
The reality of it is it was the anxiety of going to a crowded gym. I was not opposed to working out, but I did not perform well in that environment.
Okay.
And until I took a step back to put that into a level of conscious awareness, I would have just chalked it up to like, well, I don't like to work out.
Yeah.
Right. So often what we do, right? The unconscious is what's going to rule it.
Yeah.
And so what did I do? I had to embrace the pain of creating the time, the space, the energy to build out a home gym at my house so that I could do what was necessary.
Okay.
As a business owner or as a salesperson, right? This next example is perfect. How often do people recognize that in growing a business, we need to have good conversations. We need to be able to demonstrate value. We need to be able to extract like what the problems are so we can figure out how to solve them. Those typically start with building relationships and having a conversation. Yet how many people will go to pick up the phone and see that 500-pound phone sitting in front of them and don't ever pick it up to take the action to have those 4 things happen?
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to ask yourself, is it actually the root of what I'm trying to get at, the conversations, extracting problems, adding value, and providing solutions that I'm avoiding? Right. Or is there something else? So in this conversation I was having, it wasn't the 500-pound telephone. This person had a fear of what it would look like if they were successful.
Okay. Wow.
What would that actually do for my business? Could I handle it if I actually generated a significant amount more business? And they failed in so many other areas in their life that they had such a conditioned belief that I'm just going to fail, that they were expecting that. And there was a little fear about picking that up. So we had to unpack that and better understand, okay, if the fear is about what it would look like if I'm successful, that's the emotional trigger. That's the root of the avoidance of the behavior. And so in this person's case, once we got through the root of that, they pick up the phone without hesitation now and do those 4 things to generate business in their company.
So interesting, man. Just, I'm sorry. I've got software trying to update.
It's okay. It's okay.
Go away. I don't even use you anyway. I didn't even know I had Flash Player installed anymore. Okay. I want you to, you're a behavioral analyst, right?
Human behavior and performance coach is what I call myself. Yeah.
Okay. So I want you to tell us about your business. And I assume that you got into that because of your own experiences growing up. But I want you to tell people about what you do and the kinds of things that you have done to help people, and maybe the biggest surprise or whatever that you've seen in helping somebody.
Yeah, so I actually didn't get into it 100% because of my business, at least in a direct path. I was 15 years in risk management, employee benefits consulting. So I'll tell you the root of where I got into it was about 7 years ago, right after we had our son. I always said that I was going to do everything for the benefit of my family because I want them to have the freedom. I want them to have the choice. I want them to be able to live a life that they can really do it with no limits, but to not have financial strain or inability to do so for some other reason. Well, 6 months with my son went by like that.
Yeah.
And I woke up and I was like, wait a minute, I'm burning the candle at both ends. After I had my son, I hadn't actually recalibrated or adjusted my life. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't feel smart enough or have the people or mentors in my life to help me get there. So I went and hired my first coach.
Okay.
Within a month of working with him, he said, Brian, you got to be doing this. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you've been on stages speaking since you were 7. And he said, you constantly are focusing on how to build people and organizations. Like you just naturally coach and mentor people. Why would you not do it professionally? And I said, yeah, whatever, buddy. Like I'm paying you a lot of money not to tell me how great I am. Tell me figure out this other stuff. I literally completely discounted it because I was like, I want to get more.
You were imagining yourself, I'm assuming, staying in the lane you were in, 100%. But just trying to adapt and do it differently, right?
100%. Okay. And so he kept trickling it for 9 months until the universe.
Hey, you were pregnant. You were carrying a baby for 9 months.
Oh, dude, yeah. And I was just literally ignoring it. Every time he would tell me, I'm like, whatever, man, just stop. Like, I want to focus on these things. And the universe sent me a sign that I couldn't pass. And so I had to answer the question, is it complementary or conflicting to what I'm doing? And when I decided it was complementary, I jumped in with both feet. So that was 5.5 years ago. I ran it alongside my other business for that period of time. And I'm going to get where you're going, where what you asked me about, but I want to give this context because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that I was doing it for 5 years, the more coaching I did, the more speaking I did, the more I wanted to do it. I still wasn't viewing it as a path or where I was going to commit my life to.
Okay.
last July, my wife and I went away for a weekend, and it was emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically, like we were just like in sync. Like it was one of those weekends that was just dialed, right? Mm-hmm. We're heading back to pick up our kids, and she leans over to me and says, Brian, how would you feel if you didn't have to go to the office on Monday morning? And I said, well, babe, that's a pretty loaded question. Can you tell me more? And I had some other health stuff that impacted me quite a bit a few years back. I'm through that now, but she basically said, I think you let that health stuff allow fear to enter into your world in a way that I've never seen you operate. And I think you've convinced yourself that we need the money, we need the status, we need the prestige of this built and flourishing business. And she said, I'm here to tell you that we don't. I don't care if we live in a cardboard box. What I want is for you to be happy. She literally said, I think that you're dying a little bit inside every day you spend in risk management and employee benefits consulting, and you don't even see it. And I don't believe that you're even coming close to scratching your potential or the impact on the world that you want. So she said, there's nobody on this planet I'd take a bigger bet on than you. We took a bet on you once and it paid off, and I want to double down on that bet. Mm-hmm. The reason I tell that story in the context of what's happening is, as a coach, having multiple coaches in my life, I was still blind to that. And I'm grateful, and it is not lost on me the courage it took for my partner to literally put herself in a position knowing it would impact our entire life, to go change and flip scripts like this so dramatically, to challenge me and push me and give me the permission to pursue what I really think I'm on this planet to do.
What a great partner.
Yeah, it's not lost on me in any way. I am so grateful. And so that began the process. Last September, I put the wheels in motion. I executed my buy, sell, and exited my business this year, May 31st of 2020, right in the midst of COVID. Okay. Now I've been coaching and speaking for 5.5 years, but only 6 months, really 8 months, 100% dedicated focus. Okay. So what I do, I work with in a one-to-one capacity. I work with entrepreneurs, executive business owners, and high-performing salespeople, athletes, as well as other growth-minded individuals. And what we essentially do is we take them on a very intrinsic journey to really make sure that we understand very, very clearly who they are, what they are trying to accomplish, get ultimate clarity in it. And then we build a very systematic, intentional, aligned approach to structuring their life so they can live with no limits and it becomes self-regulating. So we guide them on a process literally to go backwards before we can go forwards. And I need to understand, and we need to understand literally the behavioral patterns, the environments, like their own view on success, the things that have made them successful in the past, as well as those block points, because those emotional triggers are often where we end up having the biggest breakthroughs. I think that is what surprised me most as I started turning into coaching, is I figured that I was going to go in and we'd talk about strategy and tactics. Well, we do that as well. But what I was starting to find is the deeper that we got, it's not typically the strategy and tactics that keep people from getting where they want. Sometimes it is. It's typically something within. It's typically something, some block, some emotional trigger, some behavioral pattern that literally is keeping them in that spot. And so what I was starting to find, and part of the reason that I left, is I was running in a world with people earning multiple 6 figures and 7 figures and seeing how many of them were miserable. On the outside, they looked like they had everything, right? But they were miserable. And they were numbing through some other capacity because they couldn't find any other way. And they were so isolated and focused. And they may have been super successful in one area of their life, often business, often financial, but everything else was a wreck. And they weren't experiencing joy, they weren't experiencing freedom, they weren't experiencing fulfillment, right? You were about to say something. I'm sorry, Lisa.
No, I was going to say, I think the reason so many people like that go for the business and financial part is because that's visible to everybody. And it's like the shield they can put up that they can be like, okay, I'm great, and hide behind it.
100%. And oh, by the way, my building this, like my business in the last realm was that. I mean, I literally had to prove to myself and to the world that I could.
Okay.
Right? Like that. It was that. It was it was fueled by insecurity. And I started to unpack that a few years into the business. And I was free from that towards the end of it. But the point is, I was subject to that. I was one of those people that was doing very well financially and was miserable. Right. And so I had to find other channels. And so that's why I made this. That's one of the big reasons I made this shift, is it's like, here's the thing. Nobody deserves to be miserable. Nobody. Everybody has different backgrounds. Everybody has different stories. But I think so often, and I did this as well, people start with the what, right? What car, what house, what job, what money, what spouse, what, right? And they lose the who on the process. Right? We're born as like literally the most pure light that we will ever be. You see it with kids, right? They're raw, they're authentic. You know exactly who they are. And then what do we do as parents, coaches, teachers, employers? We start layering all these shoulds on top of our kids, telling them who they need to be, who they should be, what they should do, what job they should chase, what partner they should be with, how they should show up in the world, until the point where they're just like barely a glimmer of what they once were.
Yeah, it is sad. One of the things that I have done over the years, if I ever, I do it every once in a while, if I ever feel like I'm being too harsh on myself, I pull out an old photograph.
Yeah.
When I'm like 6 years old. Sorry. This is
and you see it. Yeah.
And I'll look at it and I'll be like, look at this little girl. Is this what she deserves?
You just gave me chills when you said that, because that's what it's about.
I remind myself that this is who that little girl is. I'm sorry.
No, don't. I mean, so here's the thing, right? Like I think that was one of my biggest surprises is the emotional unpacking that I would do as a coach. I'm not a therapist, but it is one of those things that from a human behavior standpoint, we have to get to the root of. It amazed me how many high performers were suffering or literally being packaged in by shame, self-worth issues, fear in some capacity, scarcity in some capacity. I mean, the reality of it is these are so prevalent in high performers. And that's part of why they've been so great, because that shield that they've carried to protect that vulnerable side of them is what's made them successful.
Yeah.
But now that they know the strategy and tactics to be successful, when you start to unpack that and remove the heavy armor of the shield, they can start to be free. And then they start to get joy, freedom, and fulfillment back into other areas of their life. And their businesses end up typically being more successful.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest areas of surprise was, I mean, it's a great example. I have a 68-year-old client right now, financially independent, a consultant, a coach. He's somebody that I look up to. He hired me within like 3 sessions. We ended up unpacking. He's got a very deeply rooted self-worth issue.
Oh, wow.
He was
everybody else would look at him and think he has everything.
Yeah. And he was completely blind to it. Right. But it was impacting the way that he was working with his business partner. It was impacting the way he was working with clients, how they were doing proposals, how they were getting compensated. It was impacting the trajectory where he wants to go for the remainder of his life. And so we've now started to unpack that to a point that once we get down to the root, we can start to build back up on all the things that he's already done to be successful. But that pattern happens time and time again in the work that I do. But these conversations aren't normalized, because what does the world tell us to do?
Right.
It tells us to shove stuff down, put a smile on our face, and show up and go to work.
Yeah.
Right. The world literally tells us to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain. And I'm telling you, the world is wrong. Right. What I believe is that we all must choose our pain, or our suffering will choose us.
Yeah.
And so we've got to put ourselves in a position to unpack these types of things that keep us blocked, because we don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. But if we're dealing with something, whether we're aware of it or not, that's keeping us stuck, and we don't embrace the pain of turning into it to understand it and unpack it, suffering's inevitable.
Yeah. I just love what you're doing, and it ties in so well with the book, my new book that I'm working on, Disrupt Your Now, the Successful Entrepreneur's Guide to Reimagining Your Business and Life. And it's for those very people that you're talking about, that they are successful. You know, we all start a business and we're like, oh, we want to be our own boss. But so many people all over the world start their business. They're very successful and they are miserable.
That's right.
And they have no clue how to change their life, how to even begin to change their life. So that what you do is just perfect for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I'm just a firm believer that everything begins and ends with us. And I talked about people starting with the what, and that's part of the reason I get back to the who, because when we can unpack the who, we can get very, very clear on the who. We start with the who, and then we know what we want. Then the what will become a manifestation of the who, and it becomes way more powerful. And so, the reality of it is, it's like, I believe I'm on a mission right now to impact 1 billion people over the next 25 years. And what that means is I want to reduce the level of suffering in people's lives. And that can mean a whole variety of different things. But that's the only way that joy, freedom, and fulfillment can exist on our planet for that many people. That's the only way that we're going to come back and connect together on the human connection, on the human element side, so that we can start to move forward together and be able to have freedom, joy, and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And so I genuinely believe that all the pain and suffering I've endured, and you guys have only heard like a little tiny piece of it. There's crazy turns in my story over the last 25, 30 years. But the reality of it is, it's like, I believe that I was put in that scenario, one, because I could handle it. And two, because I was meant to learn a lot of the lessons that I did, so I can help so many people.
That's powerful. And I really do. I think that you're right, that if you can reach 1 billion people, and I have no doubt that you can, but that will be a huge way of us all coming together. We all need to remember that we're individuals. We're not, it's not us against them. Everybody's being so tribal now. You know, it's okay to be different. It would be awful if we weren't different. And let's just get along. Or as my friend said the other week, why can't we just love each other? You know,
that's it. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
There's so much hate, there's so much anger, there's so much fear, there's so much despair, there's so much hurting, and it's all the way across the board. And all that's happening right now is polarization and politicization that doesn't allow people to get to the root of what we're dealing with, which is human issues.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not even meaning this in any way as a political stance. This is a human conversation. And I know that's not what you mean, but I have to give that clarification because people hear it through that lens.
Right. Yeah.
I could be sitting here talking about this and they're going to put a label on me as putting me in some political party based on what they hear me say. Reality of it is, it's about people. And if we can focus back on people and getting people to be happy, free, fulfilled, this world will be a hell of a lot better place.
I think a lot of people concentrate on negative things because it actually is more exciting. When you can get mad or upset, I mean, you get your adrenaline pumping, you feel alive, it's harder to feel happy.
Yeah.
It's harder to feel grateful, and you don't get that big adrenaline rush, sadly. And I think it's almost like people are addicted to that, and so they're constantly looking for turmoil.
I actually disagree with what you just said, though, and not completely, but I want to challenge this thought just for a second.
Okay.
I actually think you can get the rush on the high end of the spectrum from emotions.
Yeah.
But so often we avoid what will get us there.
Okay.
And so we don't realize that we can experience it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. Okay. And I literally, and this is a very personal example. This was a couple of years ago. I was playing very hard with my daughter. We were just laughing and having so much fun. And we lay down on the couch and she rolls over, puts her arm around my neck, kisses me on the cheek, and she just says, "Daddy, I love you."
No.
And I broke into tears. And I say that through the lens of like, I wish I could cry more. I don't think it's a weak thing for men to cry. I just typically don't express emotion that way.
Yeah.
Particularly when it connects to joy.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so happy in that moment that I could not control myself. And it started to make me realize that if I don't experience joy in this capacity very often, I'm probably not experiencing the full spectrum of emotions this way very often, in the most raw, pure sense. And what I started to unpack through that moment put me on a journey to realize when I shut off physical pain to cope, literally to survive, I also shut off emotional pain. And when I shut off emotional pain, it also shuts off the high end of the spectrum, and you confine yourself into this box. And so I think that we're more conditioned to lean towards the anger, the fear, the hate, because that's what's readily available in front of us. I mean, even on the news, look at the news, you turn on the news, there's nothing happy.
Yeah.
It's all negative. And like, that's what fuels our adrenaline. I guess what I'm trying to do is change the narrative, because I know definitively you can experience the same adrenaline rush, the same thing on the high end of the spectrum. And I'll just be perfectly honest. If I had to choose, I'm going to pick joy every time.
Yeah, me too. I guess I should. I mean, it's just so much harder.
It's harder to get there.
There's negative things everywhere, and it's so easy. And people make themselves feel smart and important and whatever. But you have to put work into. Which,
by the way, goes exactly into my concept, because you've got to embrace the pain of putting in the work to get the joy, freedom, and fulfillment, to avoid the suffering that you'll experience by living in hate, fear, and anger for the rest of your life. Because what happens when those emotions happen, we end up numbing, we end up doing things that are more damaging to our psyche, our body, our mentality. Like, that's just a fact. It's been proven.
Yeah. And then we end up hurting the people around us, even if we don't mean to, because when you are miserable, the people around you are.
And then you create a ripple of suffering because you haven't embraced the pain you need to get to where you need to be.
Yeah. Look, we have a guest that we both love.
Whoa! Matt, Jenny. Oh, hot Maddie.
Yeah. So good to see you, and thank you for the compliment. I want to tell everybody out there, Brian and I just met September, not even this summer, in Nashville at Steve Sims' last speakeasy, and Matt was also there. I had met, Matt had been on my show, and so we had met virtually, but we'd never been together in person. But that was where I first met you. And when I first met you, I had no idea that I didn't even notice anything about your arm. And that's like a story I didn't tell you about my father. My best friend in high school, we had been hanging around together a couple of months. She'd been coming over to my house all the time. And we were at school one day and somebody said something about my father being blind. She goes, "He's not blind." I was like, "Yeah, he is." She's like, she had been coming to my house for 2 months, had no idea he was blind because he walked around like everybody else. He looked at you when you spoke to him. He knew who you were by your footsteps and different things.
Yeah.
She had no idea, but it was the same thing with you. It's a part of you, but it's not who you are. And
That's right.
you know, I literally, when you said that, I'm like, what? I couldn't even.
I'm so happy you shared that because it's so funny. I actually tell that story. I've had friends for like 5 years, Lisa.
Uh-huh.
Similar to your friend, like I'll just make some passive comment at some point. I have my accident or my arm, and they're like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, what accident?
And to me, right? I mean, I'll hold it up so everybody can see. My arms are very different. My left arm is significantly smaller. My hand, so for me, it's very obvious.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't like coddle it. It's just a part of me, right? It's something that happened to me. It is what it is. So it always amazes me when people don't notice. What's the funniest thing about that though? And I love that about your dad too. I love that you shared that because it's so true. I will literally be on stage. And I often from stage versus on podcast will tell my story in the third person because in person in particularly, a reveal moment is very powerful. And it's been a technique that I've learned. I love it, but it also helps me connect with the audience very effectively. Mm-hmm. And what'll be funny is I will literally be telling a story about a kid that got his arm ripped off. I'll be on stage, often in short sleeves.
And people
there will be people in the audience that never connect the dots until the reveal moment. Like it just to me, I guess I'm so attuned to noticing physical differences because I have them of my own. But so many people don't.
Literally, even after you told me, and I looked at your arms, you had on short sleeves, and I was like, I didn't see any difference. And I think you finally held your arms up, and I was like, oh, but even then, just you know, it's like you don't look at everybody and think what color their hair is or their eyes or whatever. You see the whole them. You know, you don't pick out the little pieces, or you know, I don't. I guess some people do, but. Yeah, that was fun getting to meet y'all and everybody out there in Nashville and hanging out. And
that was a fun event.
That's one thing that I want to encourage all of my audience is you have to get a gang of people that you really like, who are smart, who you can learn from, who are more successful than you. So many people want to be around people who are at their level or lower because they don't want to feel challenged or they don't want to feel inferior. But that's the opposite of what we need to do. We need to seek out people who have achieved more and I don't necessarily mean financially, you know, but that they have overcome things. They have done things that we haven't had to, because that's the way that we can learn. And that all goes in to what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if I show up, I'm the smartest guy in the room, or I'm, you know, the most successful person in the room. Like I'm in the wrong room. I need to find a new room. Yeah. And that's not to suggest that like those people in that room aren't worthy of conversation, because they are, and I build relationships.
Yeah.
But what that tells me is like I need to put myself in additional rooms to make sure I get that challenging.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean I walk away from those rooms or those relationships. That's not how I operate.
Yeah.
But it also means I need to find new circles, because those circles are going to continue to push me to the next level.
Right. Yeah, you have to keep continuing. You have to continue to grow, to challenge yourself, and, you know, expand your circle. We have the whole world now that we can connect with. The guy on my site last week, I don't know if you know him, Rich Mulholland. He owns Missing Link.
I don't.
Presentation powerhouse. He is so cool. He's in South Africa, and he's had to totally, you know, adapt his business because of COVID. Went literally to zero overnight, but now he's had his business for, I think, 24 years, and it's growing faster than it ever has now. So really cool story. But he was saying it is amazing to him that even though there are more online meetings now and people are doing more things virtual, he said shocking to him that people are still staying within their own circle and their own audience and even their own geography, rather than realizing now the world really is my oyster.
So I do think that there's a large percentage of people that are, but there is a fringe of individuals that are not, and they're embracing this time. Right. And I will tell you, so I pivoted aggressively after COVID. I mean, I was essentially going in full time into not a new entity, but the first time I was turning the growth switch onto this entity. And all of a sudden I had a number of stages get canceled. Right. And it's like, okay, well, now what? What are we going to do? Right. To my own discredit, I discounted the value of podcasts in the virtual world previously. And so I started dabbling in that space. Obviously, I invested in building out the right studio with the right technology, with all those things to differentiate myself as a speaker, which, by the way, one paid talk paid for it all. And so I looked at that as an investment to differentiate myself. But here's the thing I think is interesting. If we look at the time that we're in right now, again, I don't say this to impress. I say it to impress on the point, because there is a massive opportunity in front of people right now if they choose to turn into it. The amount of friction to getting to decision makers, high-level entrepreneurs, other business people, other like-minded folks that want to have an impact in the world, grow their business, and do things at a high level, the friction is virtually non-existent right now.
Yes.
In a way that I've never experienced in my professional life. And so when I pivoted hard, part of that was podcasts. But what ended up happening as a result of podcasts, I've now done over 100 in the last 5 months. I don't say that to impress. I say it to impress my point. It's created like this awesome momentum. But then what's happened as a result of that is I have literally been getting introduced to 10 to 15 new people a day.
That's awesome.
And trying to find windows to be able to have these conversations. So I'm capitalizing on the time that we have right now. It's not sustainable long-term, but the world's going to start changing again, and this opportunity will go away. I've literally been slamming almost every single day, back to back to back to back to back to back meetings. So I'm having a minimum typically of 5 new meetings with new people in my circle every day that I couldn't have done in the traditional world where I had to drive to a lunch or go to a dinner, or like, because of just the time. But when you can sit in front of Zoom, as fatiguing as it can be, there's a massive opportunity. I'm collaborating on business opportunities in the UK and in Australia right now. I've been on podcasts on different places across the globe. And because of that exposure and the networking, I'm now having conversations with people all over the planet.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, there's like 10 different countries that I'm talking to people in right now. Had I not pivoted and turned into this time, I would not be having those conversations. I'd be in my same circles doing the same things that I was doing before. Yeah. And so I crammed what I believe is to be about 18 months of new relationships into the last 4 or 5.
That's awesome.
And we all have that opportunity right now because, again, there's no friction. What risk is there for somebody to jump on a 25 or 30-minute Zoom? Virtually no risk.
Exactly. Right? And you can reach people that you never would have been able to reach before. Right. You can reach them so much more easily. And we're all in the same position. Everybody is learning. So everybody feels more vulnerable. So the people who, 9 months ago or whenever, who would have thought, I'm too important, whatever, I don't have time for you. Now they also are eager to try to learn new people.
That's right. And because everybody's used to this format now, a virtual, that literally there's no friction. Whereas before, think about it. If you're trying to prospect or build a relationship with somebody, it's like, oh, can I buy you a coffee?
Right.
Well, that person is thinking to themselves, okay, well, that coffee is going to be a 15-minute drive each way. It's 30 minutes there. At best, it's 30 minutes there, but likely it's going to go 45 minutes. So they're thinking to themselves, that's 90 minutes of my time. Is this the best use of my time?
Yes. And I'm stuck at this table with this person that...
And I don't even know if I like them or not, right? Yeah, if I can endure them for that long.
Is it going to turn into a sales pitch? Yeah. That's exactly...
But now, a 25-minute Zoom, there's no risk. None.
Yep, that's exactly what Rich said. So y'all listen to very successful men who within a week of each other have said the very same thing. Yeah. Take it to heart, to start reaching out to the people that you've been afraid of reaching out to. Or maybe you don't even know who they are yet. Figure out if I could contact anybody, who would be awesome for me to be able to reach out to. You never know. I mean, I ended up I'd only done like maybe 5 or 6 shows. I ended up with the Adam White. He wrote the book on Motown. It's like this thick, with Barry Gordy's right-hand man. And who was in charge of all the financial stuff, Berry Gordy, founded Motown. Well, Adam was the editor-in-chief of Billboard magazine for years. Left there, he was the VP of communications for Universal Music Group International. When he retired from there, that's when he wrote the book with him. So it's like, that's somebody I would have never dreamed of meeting. I kind of met him accidentally because I saw where he wrote a blog post about my cousin, who was a writer and producer. And the reason he wrote it about him is because Buddy wrote David Ruffin's biggest hit after he left the Temptations. So that's why he wrote it. So he'd written this blog post about him on his site, which is all about Motown. And I messaged Buddy. I'm like, oh, you've probably seen it, but if you haven't, here's this article. And he says it's his #1 article on the site and has been forever. And so Buddy hadn't seen it. He's like, I don't even remember that interview. It was really funny. I'm making the story way too long. The interview was in 1990. They had not seen each other since, but I had reached out to Adam and I was like, I really enjoyed, yada, yada, yada. And he wrote me back, thank you so much. And I have a new message on my post from Charles, isn't it? Charles Kipps. And he goes, thank you so much for telling him about it. So anyway, we started communicating and he ended up coming on my show. He's in London.
But that's a great point.
I mean,
perfect example.
Yeah. I would have never dreamed that I would have had somebody who was the editor-in-chief of Billboard and VP of communications for Universal Music Group on my show, especially when I'd only done like 5 or 6 shows by then. Yeah,
and you just never know. I know you. I think didn't you have Justin Breen on your show recently?
Yeah, he was on here a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So Justin's a perfect example of applying this philosophy.
Yes.
Right. It was kind of interesting because he and I have been on a similar trajectory and path, and we ended up connecting a few months back because we were noticing that we were on so many of the same podcasts. Like I'd either be on it and then he'd be on a week later, or vice versa. Funny. And so finally we were like, we gotta connect and figure out what to do. Well, the reason I tell you that story, he's applying this on like hyperspeed at a level like I haven't seen anybody do, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it. Yeah. Justin's on another level.
Yeah.
But where that went to is, again, you never know who you're going to get to by saying yes. If it aligns with relationships, values, or impact right now, I'm saying yes. I'm not filtering. I'm not weeding. I'm trying to figure out where to fit it into the schedule to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. But Justin introduced me to somebody who introduced me to somebody who introduced me to somebody who ended up getting me to, which I didn't even know who the guy was until I started connecting with him. But his name is Devin Harris. And he was one of the original 4 men who founded the Jamaican bobsled team.
Oh, awesome. That's cool.
And so we ended up we started jamming. Well, I watched Cool Runnings a lot way back when. I recently showed it to my kids. Love that movie. I'm very infrequently starstruck, but I was so moved by their story, right? Yeah. It wasn't about because he obviously didn't act in the movie. I was moved by their story and what they did. Well, I literally grew up idolizing the story of those 4 men who created this team. And I was just on his podcast last week.
That is so cool.
Right. And it started by saying yes. And through the lens of trying to network with just good people who want to have an impact. Yeah. I wasn't after getting to Devin, but Devin's a phenomenal human being who's on a mission. I mean, he literally, the theme of his show is, I'm going to totally butcher it. Keep on pushing is literally what it is. Keep on pushing. They're pushing the bobsled. Keep on pushing. He and I are on a similar path. We're going to now collaborate and figure out ways we can help each other.
Oh, that
cool. All started by saying yes, right?
Yeah. Speaking of bobsledding, I made a connection through a guy that I met on LinkedIn because he was attracted to our mission to combat veteran suicide through NASCAR that you know about, and he's a veteran. So he introduced me to these guys, and we were talking. One of the guys who's a veteran, he was in the Olympics in Pyongyang bobsledding, but he knew nothing about it before that. He just saw it one day. He's like, I think that'd be really cool. Taught himself, ended up being on the Olympic team. And I have no clue how. I need to ask him, how did you teach yourself? Because I'm not even sure where he lived. But so all these people keep introducing me to people. Steve Sims introduced me to Justin. And then Justin introduced me to tons of people, but Richard Mulholland is one of the ones that I met, the guy in South Africa. He's one of the ones that I met through Justin. But yeah, Justin is amazing. He is so interesting.
He's applying that philosophy right now. He's networking on hyperspeed, and he's doing it in a way that he's connecting a lot of good people. And he's one of the few people that I've met that it's like, as soon as you get off the call, there's 5 or 6 connections that are already in your inbox.
Exactly.
You know? And I think that's why he and I connected, because we kind of both did that for each other.
Yeah.
And we've just kind of continued to stay in touch and look for ways to add value. But I think that's the message, is it's not, again, the stories I told were not to draw attention to the stuff that's going on in my world. It's, I want people to recognize there is opportunity right now. And all of us can do what Justin's doing right now, what I'm trying to apply right now, what others are trying to apply right now. And we have an opportunity while it lasts. You know, but we have to embrace the pain of doing something that's different, that's uncomfortable, so we can avoid the suffering of having stagnant growth in this crazy world pandemic, right? We just have to look at it that way. You mentioned that guy with the bobsled. I think we should probably connect him and Devin. I'll bet you they'd have a lot to talk about.
That's what I was thinking, because, you know, anyway, I'll have, his name is Lou Morena, but I'll introduce y'all on LinkedIn, and then
perfect. So, and then I'll get him connected with Devin, because I guarantee they probably know each other potentially, but if not, they need to know each other, because I'm sure they could share a lot of stories and help a lot of people.
Well, I'd love to meet him too. That's fascinating. Now I need to go back and watch that movie again. I love it. Well, let me see. Oh my gosh, I've had you on here for an hour. I don't want to take up all your time with it being the holiday and having time with your family, but tell everybody how they can find out more about you, how they can learn from you, but also if they are interested in working with you, collaborating, or having you as a coach.
Absolutely. So my social handle's right there on the screen, so people can see that. That's pretty much on all platforms. But if you go to brianbogert.com, that's my website. You're going to see a whole lot of content that I produce for free. You know, the reality of it is, if I want to impact 1 billion people, 99.9999999% of those will never pay me $1. I'm okay with that. I understand that. I'm very clear on that. So we've got a series called Bogert's Bullets that gets released on all platforms and on YouTube that's housed there. A lot of the articles that we've written through Forbes and other periodicals are there as well. And there's just a bunch of free resources, but there's also information on our courses, speaking opportunities, coaching opportunities, one-to-one. So if there's any interest there, and through the lens of giving stuff, I do have a free offer for anybody who's listening. If you want to start to recognize how to get clarity, how to lead yourself on this intrinsic journey, figure out ways to embrace pain to avoid suffering in your life, go to nolimitsprelude.com. And there's a succinct, pared down version of a lot of our coaching philosophies that'll give you the right prompting questions to take yourself on this journey.
Oh, cool. So nolimitsprelude.com. I'll put all the links in the show notes.
Perfect.
I thank you so much for being on here. I can't wait to see you next. Hopefully we get to go to the next easy. And I just really appreciate your time and sharing all of your insight and perspective with us.
Well, Lisa, I had a blast. And like I said, I'm grateful for people like you who just put good into the world. So, you know, I'd love to come back and join you again. We can talk in a whole different direction and kind of go from there. But it's been a blast. So let's do it again.
Sounds great. Everybody out there, if you enjoyed this show, please share it with other people. And you can also see all of my past shows on lisakipps-brown.com. And I will see all of y'all next week. Everybody, happy Thanksgiving. And Brian, happy Thanksgiving to your family.
You as well, my friend.
Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.